The surf hits your boots like a slap. June 15, 1944. Saipan. The water is warm, but your hands feel numb around the rifle. The sky is a hard blue, empty except for the black smoke already rising inland. Salt burns your lips. Diesel and cordite cling to the air. Ahead, the beach is not sand. It is a wall of noise, machine gun cracks, the hollow thud of mortars, the tearing sound of metal on metal. Men drop before they reach the shore. You stumble forward, pack dragging you down, heart hammering so loud it drowns out everything else. Somewhere beyond the smoke, something has been waiting for this moment. This is where the myth of Japan's untouchable empire is about to die. For 3 years, the imperial war machine has expanded with terrifying certainty. From the Philippines to Malaya, from Hong Kong to the Dutch East Indies, Japanese forces have moved with speed and shock that seemed unstoppable. The belief is simple, repeated in staff rooms and whispered in propaganda. The Emperor's war is protected by destiny. The island chain of the Pacific is not just territory, it is a shield. Any enemy who dares to approach the inner defenses will be bled white and thrown back into the sea. Saipan is not just another island. It is the hinge of that shield. From here, American bombers can reach the Japanese home islands. From here, the war stops being distant. Everyone on this island understands what it represents. To the Japanese command, Saipan is sacred ground, the final barrier between invasion and homeland. To lose it is to expose the empire itself. And so they believe they cannot lose, not because they will survive, but because they will make victory so costly that the enemy will break first. In the hills and ravines beyond the beach, the defenses are already awake. Guns are dug into limestone, hidden behind palms and rock. Artillery waits under camouflage nets. Caves honeycomb the cliffs, each one a firing position, a shelter, a last stand. The defenders have been told the truth without softness. There will be no rescue, no retreat. Their duty is not to hold for relief, but to consume the invader. Every American who lands is a weapon to be neutralized, a body to be traded for time. The Emperor's war does not require survival. It requires sacrifice. The first waves grind toward the beach. Landing craft shudder under impact. Ramps slam down. Men surge forward into shallow water that suddenly deepens. Bullets snap across the surface like whips. The air itself seems to crack. Bodies fall into the surf. Some disappear without a sound. Others scream once and vanish under the churn. You wade, rifle held high, lungs burning, eyes stinging from salt and smoke. The sand is littered with gear, helmets, dark shapes that do not move. The heat is immediate, crushing, as if the island itself is pressing down on your chest. This is not how the myth was supposed to work. Behind the first dunes, the resistance does not fade. It thickens. Fire comes from angles you cannot see. Mortar rounds drop with a dull, wet thud, throwing sand and flesh into the air. Units dissolve into fragments. Radios go silent or scream with overlapping orders that make no sense in the chaos. Tanks try to move off the beach and are hit before they clear the shore, black smoke clawing into the sky. The belief that sheer force can smash through any defense shatters in the first hours. This is not a setback. It is a rupture. The enemy is not collapsing. It is absorbing the assault and answering with a precision that feels rehearsed. Still, the advance continues. It has to. Small groups crawl forward, sprinting between bursts of fire, throwing themselves into shell holes and shallow folds in the ground. Every yard costs blood. Grenades roll into cave mouths and vanish in muffled blasts. Sometimes a gun falls silent. Sometimes another opens 10 feet away. The island is not a battlefield with a front line. It is a labyrinth. You clear one position only to discover that it was never alone. As the day burns on, the heat becomes an enemy of its own. Sweat blinds your eyes. Your throat is raw from dust and smoke. The wounded lie where they fall because there is no safe way to reach them. Medics crawl forward anyway, dragging men by collars, by straps, by whatever they can grab. The beach behind you is a field of wreckage, landing craft, smashed equipment, bodies half in the surf. The water is no longer clear. It is dark with oil and blood. The myth does not break in a single moment. It fractures. The next day, the assault resumes. Naval guns hammer the interior. Aircraft dive and roar overhead, dropping bombs that make the ground jump. From offshore, it must look like annihilation. On the ground, the effect is smaller, colder. Limestone absorbs the shock. Caves swallow fire. When the bombardment lifts, guns reappear, their barrels already trained on the gaps. The advance inches forward. You take a ridge. You lose it to a counterattack that seems to rise from the earth itself. The defenders do not rush in waves. They emerge in bursts, small, precise, deadly, then vanish back into the rock. By the third day, exhaustion is everywhere. Men move on instinct because thought takes too much energy. Water is rationed. Ammunition arrives in uneven trickles. The wounded grow feverish in the heat. Flies gather. The smell of decay hangs over the ground like a second atmosphere. The island is only a few miles long, but it feels endless. For the Japanese defenders, the fight is something else entirely. They watch the bombardments with a calm born of preparation. They know where the fire will fall. They know which caves will hold and which will collapse. They have studied the beaches, the ridges, the gullies. Every position is part of a web designed to trade space for blood. Their orders are absolute. Do not retreat. Do not surrender. Delay the enemy. Make the cost unbearable. The empire does not require their survival. It requires their deaths to mean something. When the Americans finally break deeper into the island, they discover how complete that system is. Every strongpoint is linked to another. Destroy one, and another fires into the breach. Clear a trench, and a machine gun opens from behind. Snipers appear in trees, on cliffs, in shadows you never noticed. There is no single decisive blow to be struck. Only a slow, grinding reduction of a defense built to consume attackers one by one. Casualties climb. By the end of the first week, thousands are dead or wounded on both sides. Entire companies are reduced to handfuls of men. The language changes. Officers stop talking about objectives. They talk about survival, about holding ground until nightfall, about getting through the next hour. The island does not feel like a battlefield anymore. It feels like a machine. Then the war changes shape again. In the hills, something darker begins to surface. As American units push inland, they encounter scenes that do not fit the logic of battle. Villages emptied in silence. Houses burned from the inside. Then, in ravines and on cliffs, civilians appear, women, children, the elderly, herded by soldiers, surrounded by shouting and gunfire. You hear the cries before you see them. You see people driven toward the edge of rock that drops into the sea. They jump. Some are pushed. Some step forward with eyes closed. Bodies tumble down the cliff, striking stone, disappearing into the surf far below. The air fills with screams that do not sound like combat. Marines freeze in place, rifles half raised, unable to understand what they are seeing. Medics and chaplains run forward, shouting in broken Japanese, waving, trying to pull people back. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they do not. The orders given to these civilians were as absolute as those given to soldiers. Death before capture. The myth of imperial destiny has reached its final, most terrible form. This is the second collapse. The enemy's illusion was not only military, it was moral. The belief that the emperor's war was sacred, that surrender was worse than death, that the population itself must be expended as a weapon. On Saipan, that belief becomes visible in the most brutal way possible. The defense is no longer just concrete and guns. It is ideology, weaponized against its own people. For the Americans, the shock is profound. They are trained for combat, for killing enemies, for surviving under fire. They are not prepared to watch families die because they have been told that capture is dishonor. The ground beneath the battle shifts. The war is no longer only about territory or strategy. It is about what kind of system demands this price from those it claims to protect. And still, the fighting does not stop. As the days grind on, the Japanese command launches repeated counterattacks. At night, figures move through the darkness, charging positions with rifles, with grenades, with bayonets, with bare hands when ammunition runs out. The attacks are ferocious, almost ritualistic. They do not aim to retake ground. They aim to kill as many as possible before being killed themselves. The screams, the muzzle flashes, the sudden explosions tear through the darkness. When morning comes, the ground between the lines is covered with bodies. Each attack follows the same pattern: renewed confidence, the belief that spirit and sacrifice can still break the enemy. Then, annihilation. Machine gun fire cuts down waves of men. Artillery shreds formations. The attacks end not in breakthrough, but in silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of burning brush. This is not a heroic last stand. It is a system devouring itself. As the Japanese forces are pushed north, their situation becomes untenable. Supplies vanish. Ammunition is rationed to the last round. Food is whatever can be scavenged. Medical care collapses into improvisation and prayer. Command and control disintegrate as units are isolated, communications severed by bombardment. What remains is not an army in the conventional sense, but scattered pockets of men fighting on instinct, on indoctrination, on the refusal to accept that the war they believed in cannot be won here. The Americans, too, are changing. The early belief that overwhelming firepower alone can carry the day has been burned away. Every advance now is deliberate. Engineers move with infantry. Tanks coordinate with flamethrowers to clear caves. Artillery is timed with assaults to the minute. Supply becomes as critical as ammunition. Water, medical evacuation, communications, everything is planned, replanned, adjusted. The assault is no longer an act of will. It is an operation of systems. This is where the deeper collapse occurs. What fails on Saipan is not the courage of the men on either side. It is the doctrine that defined the enemy's war, the belief that moral superiority can replace logistics, that sacrifice can substitute for sustainability, that a nation can fight a modern, industrial war by consuming its people rather than supporting them. Courage does not move ammunition through shattered roads. Courage does not replace fuel, food, or medical supplies. Courage does not rebuild destroyed airfields or replace trained pilots. Courage can carry a man into fire. It cannot keep an army functioning once the structures that sustain it are gone. On Saipan, the Japanese war machine runs out of structure. By the second week, organized resistance is collapsing. Units are cut off, reduced to small groups hiding in caves and ravines. Some continue to fight. Others, starving and wounded, finally surrender, often in disbelief that the enemy will not kill them on sight. Many do not surrender at all. They fight until they are buried under artillery, burned out of caves, or killed in the last night charges that end in slaughter. The civilian tragedy continues. Marines and medics move through the island, pulling survivors from hiding places, feeding the starving, tending to the wounded. The cliffs where people jumped remain silent, the sea below still washing against rock that has become a grave. When the final resistance ends, the island is a ruin: burned villages, shattered airfields, caves filled with bodies. The numbers are stark: tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers dead, thousands of civilians dead, many by their own hands or forced into it. American casualties in the thousands. The island has been taken, but the victory does not feel like triumph. It feels like standing in the aftermath of something that should never have been required. This is where history tilts. Saipan is not just another battle in the Pacific. It is the moment when the war becomes unavoidable for Japan itself. Within days, news of the defeat reaches Tokyo. The loss is not merely military. It is psychological, political, existential. For the first time, the homeland is within reach of enemy bombers. The Emperor's War is no longer a distant struggle in far-off seas. It is at the gates. The political shock is immediate. The Japanese government collapses. Leaders who promised that the empire could not be breached are forced to confront a reality they can no longer deny. The myth of invincibility, the idea that destiny, spirit, and sacrifice alone could shield the nation, has been exposed as a lie written in blood on a small island in the Pacific. From Saipan, the bombers will fly. The war will move closer. Cities will burn. The cost will only grow. But the direction is now set. The empire can no longer expand. It can only endure, retreat, and finally fall. What happened here changes how the war is fought on both sides. For the Americans, Saipan confirms that victory in the Pacific will not come from isolated acts of bravery, but from integration. Logistics, engineering, air power, naval support, and infantry acting as a single machine. For Japan, Saipan reveals the fatal flaw of its doctrine. A strategy built on sacrifice without replacement, on ideology without industry, on honor without sustainability, cannot survive a war of modern production. The men who fought on this island remember it not as a glorious conquest, but as a place where something broke that could never be repaired. They remember the heat, the dust, the smell of burning brush and explosives. They remember the night attacks, the sudden violence in the dark. They remember the civilians on the cliffs. They remember the realization that the enemy was not only trying to kill them, but was willing to destroy itself to avoid defeat. This was not just a battle for an island. This was the moment when the Emperor's War, built on the myth that spirit could replace structure, that sacrifice could replace strategy, collapsed in front of the world. From this point forward, the outcome of the Pacific War was no longer a question of who believed more fiercely, but of who could build, supply, coordinate, and endure. The surf still hits the beaches of Saipan. The cliffs still stand over the sea. The wind still carries the smell of salt across the hills. But beneath that quiet lies the memory of the moment when an empire discovered that destiny is not a weapon, and that a modern war cannot be fought on faith alone. They did not just take an island. They shattered a belief.